Dun, 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 dun. Everyone's here. Hello, everyone. Hello, Neil, Lucy, Joel, Holly, Carrie, Britt. Oh, there's old crew. I love this. Hello, everyone. Welcome to. I gotta look at the camera. I don't know why I'm looking at my screen. This is the problem. I get distracted by my beautiful new. No, it's not a new shirt. It's an old shirt. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wine Coach. It's me, Nick, your trusted sommelier with the Bert and Ernie looking over my shoulder. Today, we're looking at flavor pairings, which is super fun and unusual, and something I'm not super like confident with. But I think we're gonna have some fun, and I think we're going to explore a little bit about like the chemistry of flavor and understand that you can sort of, there is a roadmap to like help you navigate matching food and wine or beverage and food and whatever kind of flavors you're creating. And I think this is going to be a lot of fun. But I can't do it alone. As always, I have brought a lovely co-host to join me. She is a superstar sommelier at one of the best restaurants in Canada, at Aloe. Brittany and I share a love for Austrian wine and very nerdy board games, but I'm super excited to have you on the show finally. Please welcome to the stage, Brittany. How are you, Brittany? Thanks for coming once again. You've already.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. And like I said, I am actually going to be relying on you almost constantly to tell us what you think. I mean, I just want your approval. So as long as you just go, oh yeah, that's really cool, I'm gonna like be really, really happy person. But to start off, I wanted to introduce our third co-host for tonight, Taste Buds and Molecules by Francois Chartier. I was at a sake tasting. I'm not sure if you were at it as well, but a sake tasting probably late last year. And he was on screen and he was sort of introducing this like flavor, like the chemistry of flavor of sake and food and the flavor profiles that go with it. And I was like, this is super interesting and like definitely helped me approach food and wine pairing from a more like chemistry aspect rather than just like cultural traditions and things like that. So I went to Amazon and I bought his book straight away. And I've been planning on doing a flavor pairing wine coach since early February, but I just hadn't got around to it. So when I asked Brittany to be a part of this wine coach, I was like, look, I can scan the pages for you of the flavor, of the chapters we're talking about. She's like, I already got the book. I was like, oh, thank you. Someone who knows what they're talking about. So, I don't know, how did you find this book? I found it super interesting.
It was really nice because earlier today and yesterday, I kind of reacquainted myself with it. I had bought it when I was preparing for my interviews and stages at Aloe, so a little over 4 years ago now, because another wonderful som in the community, Tony, had the job beforehand, but she went on to a different project. And I said, okay, what is the tip on getting this job? And she said, first of all, you should read this book. If you want to sound like, if you want to kind of have a concept of like why classic pairings are classic pairings, but also how to pivot from there into things that are a little bit more exciting and inventive, like this is the book that you need to read first of all. So it was kind of handed down to me from somebody else who was in the position before me.
Tony was on Vietti tasting in late January, early March. That was a roller coaster for both of us, but she's an amazing song and definitely iconic in our community as like consummate professional who knows so much about wine. So that's kind of fun. If you find this book, the layout is like from the early 90s. It looks like a really bad like cookbook you buy at the supermarket, but I promise that it's a really interesting read. And the Francois is from Quebec, and he's got some really, if you can read French, he's got some also really cool books that even deeper dive, but I think they're only published in French, but what are you going to do? But this is going to be an interesting one. It's kind of one where I'll have to like guide us through step by step how I want everyone to experience it, because it is kind of such a strange, especially the first one, which is going to be kind of strange. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention Rachel is here in the chat as always. She said hello, but I always forget to. If I don't have a rundown, I don't have like a capital letters that say introduce Rachel. I always forget. But we're going to taste wine number one. Pour a little bit of it in your glass and just like understand the wine by itself, just like as it is without any kind of like flavor profile. This is the wine also. Veninga. So the label doesn't say Pinot Blanc. Fairhair Burgundy is the Hungarian name for Pinot Blanc, but I didn't want to put that on the sheet because that sounds confusing. But I thought the first way to do it is like to understand any of these is to like taste the components separately, and then you taste them together and you see what sort of experience you sort of have one. I kind of really like Pinot Blanc, especially Austrian Pinot Blanc. It's just there's something about it that just makes me really, it's fresh, but there's lots of flavor and broadness.
We usually have the on the Austrian side of the border in Burgenland. We usually have the Preler Pinot Blanc, and it's really one of those kind of secret heroes on the wine list. Like, and I don't, most of the time people aren't drawn to it, but if somebody just wants something really versatile and refreshing, I find that everybody always loves the Pinot Blanc, even if they don't know that they will.
And then if you've still got the little cup of the Mileti, maybe even have a little sip of it. This is hard because there's no like feedback from the audience. So I'm not really sure if anyone's following along. Please have a sip so that you can kind of experience what that is. Miletti's a really cool Piedmontese spirit producer. This is anise flavored sort of liqueur, I guess. I like it because it's very anisey and it's got lots of like licorice intense flavors and alcohol, but there's a good sweetness to it that kind of makes it, for lack of a better word, palatable. But it's super fun. I could drink a lot of that. I get really drunk. And now the next part is like put a little bit in your glass. This is the most step one is the most complex. It's 34%. If someone's asking, 34%. I don't need to show you, just trust me. Put a bit in your glass and maybe like coat the glass like this, and then like either drink it or pour it out. Depends on how you're feeling. And then we pour the wine back in, and it's not technically mixing, but like there's enough of the flavor in the glass to like to impart something to the wine without it kind of competing with the wine. I kind of like it. It brings this like intense green note to the wine and like changes the flavor profile completely.
I agree, because a lot of the time Pinot Blanc, there's something just that there can be a little bit kind of an evenness, just kind of a little bit mineral, a little bit fresh, but not usually over the top with flavor. But I did really find that with having the Mileti anisette and then going back to it, that it really brought those more kind of green, more specific fresh flavors instead just of a general experience of freshness.
Absolutely. And so Pinot Blanc was one of the examples I used, but some of the examples that they had that go well with like anise flavors were Chenin Blanc, Riesling, Pinot Grigio, Albarino. So it's all the like really mineral kind of dry, sort of herbal flavored wines. And I think kind of to bring this experiment to like real world, like flavors like fennel and dill, things that have that anise quality can sometimes be hard to pair. And it's not necessarily pairing about what wine goes with good food. It's also about what food will complement, like will bring out the best in the wine. And I think this is kind of what I wanted to provide, perhaps, a real world tip, but I like that. Because they can be hard things to pair, especially salads, especially things that have anise flavor. They can feel a little very strong. And like the Meledi is a strong, very intense flavor of anise. But when you have it with these wines, it kind of helps it feel much more like integrated and not so intense, which I kind of appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of it for that one. I mean, the rest are pretty easy because it's like food, but I don't know. I really like that. I want to experiment more. And the other cool thing, it was a bit. I felt it could have been a little controversial putting a liquid into wine, but my sake. Working a lot with Mariko and learning about sake from her, sake has a really strong tradition of adding, beer into sake or adding peppers and adding like different flavors directly into the sake. And I think this was kind of my way of expressing that kind of experiment and just like having a go at like adding another liquid into a wine, which wine we tend to hold like sacred and we don't want to, add anything to it. So, I wonder what everyone thinks in the chat. Nothing, but that's okay. You're all busy experiencing it.
I think it's good to be playful with it. A liquid and wine kind of having it in your mouth at the same time. It's not that different from what we're doing when we're doing kind of thoughtful pairings with wine and food. Like if you're washing down a bite of food with your wine, you're really kind of including those ingredients truly together and they're going to interact in that way. So if you're doing it with a liquid, it's really just another ingredient in a way.
What's your like, what is your, what's the first step in your process? Say Patrick comes to you and says, hey, I've got this dish. Do you where does your brain first go in terms of wine pairing? I'm super curious. And if that's secret, and please just tell me. But
it's not secret at all. There's no proprietary secrets in this particular subject. I mean, I guess if I had to kind of break it down in a way, I would say how I kind of think about food and wine pairings. It's like a fourfold kind of thing. Like I think it's flavor and texture, and then kind of the story and the emotion. And honestly, I think I usually tend to think about texture first of all, which can be like a structural thing, like acidity or tannin, because there's things that can actually go really wrong in your mouth if those aren't together. But also kind of richness, whether you want to enhance the richness of something or whether you want to offer some relief to it. And then probably after that, going into the more kind of flavor combination elements, which I've learned so much from this book and just kind of learning along the way, and a little bit of other kind of wine chemistry. But I find that a lot of the time you really have to try the wine and the food together before you know which one is going to be the perfect match. Some of the more kind of maybe favorite parts of it tend to be a little bit more narrative and story based. And that's absolutely where the whole idea of what grows together goes together. can come together, or if you're thinking about the genesis of a dish with the kitchen that sometimes involves flavors that maybe didn't end up in the dish that we can include in the wine, or really kind of thinking about, some kind of head scratchers of a dish, like what wine do you pair with an egg dish? And then sometimes you might think of like tamago in Japanese cooking and how there's sweet soy sauce. So maybe you want something sweet. And then the emotional component is, it's like if it's just like a home cooked meal kind of feeling, then you want something that's going to be really happy and comforting a lot of the time too. If you have clean, really precise flavors, then maybe a more kind of serious linear wine. And so those, I would say, are the 4 ways, the kind of in order. In that order would be the 4 elements that I think of most of all.
That's such a cool process. I love it. Like I said, it's not necessarily something I'm not familiar with, and you hit on a really funny point. It's like, unless you taste the food and the wine, like the food and the wine together, and you can't really ever truly predict what will happen. And so if you ever hear songs like making something up about what pairs well with something, like you should take it with a grain of salt. Like you need to truly, you always should taste something first, and you should always you should always drink and taste something together. And then the other point I wanted to make was, I was reading a magazine on sake, and I was reading an article, and the writer went on to say how they noticed that Western, more European drinkers always had clean wine glasses, because when they eat and they drink, they do it separately. And so there was never a lot of food on the rim of the glass. But then they went on to say how they observed in Japan, Japanese eaters tend to have really dirty rims of their glass, because they're often eating and drinking at the same time and using the flavors of whatever's in their glass and whatever's on their plate to interact. And I think it was a really great imagery to go, oh, I need to you need it has to be conscious. Sometimes it's really easy to scoff down something or drink something and not ever let them talk to one another.
I can absolutely say that at Aloe, I love when, glasses are dirty, and when I clear them at the end of a pairing, that, it's clear that the food and wine were had together. And it's actually something that we will delicately mention a lot of the time in the dining room if people are doing the pairings, especially if they finish the course, the plate is clear and the wine is still 90% in the glass. It's like, no, it's really have some of the wine, have some of the food, wash it down together. Because especially when you're doing pairings that are less based on kind of feeling or things like that, and more talking about these particular flavor pairings, you really have to have them together to have the maximum effect.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, pairing number 2. Total on. I mean, this is a big subject, and you could probably do a whole tasting on this flavor compound. So this is a flavor compound. I'm going to put it in the chat if you don't have it. Bodolon. I hope I spelled it wrong. Oh my God, my keyboard is the worst. So so this is a flavor compound that is present in a lot of very classic dishes. Sherry, vin jaune, maple syrup, nuts, lots of curry flavors. A lot of these, and when he talks about maple syrup, it was like my brain was like, what? I never associated maple syrup with these classic sherry oxidative kind of notes. And so I got a teaspoon of maple syrup in my mouth, and then I had a glass of this wine. In the process, spilling maple syrup all over the bar. But what I did learn was that, yeah, absolutely, this is such a very classic, well, not classic, but it's such a complementary pairing that what I tried to do was smash all of those flavors together in one little snack and pair it with an oxidative wine from the Jura, which we tasted in the Alpine wine session a few weeks ago, but I still had some left over, and I was like, okay, this is perfect. I don't have a lot of sherry, at Peter Pan because it's cherry, but it's something I do wish to hope for in the future is to use more cherry. And I think if you tasted this in a restaurant or like this pairing was in a restaurant, I think sherry would be a much better pairing. But I think the oxidation in the wine is enough to get those flavor compounds like mixing together. All we have to do is taste the wine in wine number 2, have a little sip, see what it's like, have a little walnut with maple and cumin, and just like, tell me what you think. I know this is kind of fun. That's kind of fun. Yeah, I'm more excited about like cumin on like sweet maple flavored things. This is just such a fun thing to use cumin for. Yeah. It's like that oxidation note just like goes away and it just tastes like a nice wine from the Jura. It's kind of not cancelled out, but like it just melds into like this maple walnut sweetness, which is kind of fun. Good. I know. Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, if there's a particular wine that I wish that I could just have great examples of all the time, it would be oxidative wines from the Jura in terms of pairing, because they're such wonderful aha moments. And I know a lot of the time, like people stick their nose into
read the chat. It's like aha moment.
Because it smells so intense. You think you're about to have something that's like way more alcoholic, so much more texturally intense, and then it just goes so well with food. A wonderful time. I had a Ganava, an age example of Ganava Sauvignon when I was in Santa Barbara at this fish curry restaurant. And it's just one of those memories that is just
that restaurant that has like this great crazy wine list and it's just like on a pier somewhere. I feel like I've read an article about it or something.
Well, it's BBG's, which is Raj Par's restaurant, but one of the best pairings I've ever had in my life.
That's so interesting. Yeah, and like this, I remember the last great fine dining experience I had was in Japan, and they poured it on a Ganavat as well, and it was, I think, if it's something you really want to like, if it's something, if like food and like having great food wine, like oxidative wines are especially like non-sherries are such a really great way to experience that. This is 2014. So it has a little age to it as well, which is nice. And this is a blend of Chardonnay and Sauvignon. So it's not as intense as like you would get a Vignon or some of the other Jura wines you get, but I don't know, it has this really, you also like, if this is a style of wine you like, now you kind of know what flavors you can use with it. Like you can have, obviously like any kind of meat dish would go really well, like pork or chicken or like even like game and stuff would go really well. But like now you can add walnuts or nuts or maple or even in a curry. Like if you really like curries, like this will pair really well with it. And this is kind of these really condensed like specific examples that we've got in front of us aren't really like useful on their own, but I think if you expand upon it, you can kind of have some really great tools and like inspirations to create some really cool interactions. I just want to eat walnuts on that. I don't know. This is fun. I could just eat these walnuts on that. I really like.
Same.
I should have toasted the cumin just to get a bit more aromatics from it, but okay. So far, so good. I'm happy with the 2 pairings. This is the risky one. This was the one I was like, okay, I'm going to do a lot of interpretation here and just see what comes out of it. So the article here is more about cloves. Cloves is, and the fact that Francois Chartier kind of like dedicated a whole chapter to cloves, I was like, what is this ingredient? Like, obviously I know what a clove is. I'm not silly. But I was like, does I was so intrigued by like the depth of like the flavors that he goes to describe, and I was like, I never really paid a lot of attention to cloves before, and so he goes on to describe, and this is the example he used was red wines and cheeses, especially soft cheeses, often don't pair very well together. That's they can the tannin structure in the wine often interacts poorly. And so his suggestion was adding cloves into the cheese and infusing the flavor of cloves into the cheese to help bridge the gap between these two very sometimes disparate elements. And this is what I did. So I had some grey owl left over in the restaurant, which is a soft goat cheese that's rolled in ash. And I ground up some cloves and I kind of smushed it all together on Saturday. And it's been infusing for a few days. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to taste some cloven flavored goat cheese and taste some red wine and see how it all works out together. This is Cheese Corner. This is the Cheese Corner, guys. And I'm not mad. Cloves has a really intense smell and flavor, but with cheese, it actually worked really well together. And like they kind of hold up, especially the goat cheese, which has that like piquancy and that acidity. I mean, I'm not mad at that pairing.
I have to admit that when I got the list of wines and I said, red wine, big red wine, and cheese. I wasn't so sure about it. Just because, especially, I think I have a little bit of I don't know what the right word is, but there's so many times that we have a cheese course at Aloe, and a lot of the time it'll be hard cheese or cheese and fruit, and everybody is just appalled, offended, and just hate my guts after I give them a white wine with it. That they have to go back to white wine for the cheese course, because a lot of the time, especially with the hard cheeses, they can be so astringent. But then I reread Chartier's section about this, and then tasting it, and I really think I'm very happy to say that I think the pairing is great. There's something especially, I think, about you choosing the gray owl where it has the ash on the side, plus that kind of warmness of the clove. It kind of makes you think about kind of wood roasted meat. And that's exactly what you want when you think of an Aglianico. So I am pleasantly surprised by how successful I think the pairing is.
And I think it's if someone is, I would have that same reaction. If someone said, "Hey, this is my Aglianico, my Tarossi, and my goat cheese, and I think they go really well together," I'd be like, that's something you would go to like a winery and you'd have it, and you'd be like, "No, this is just like a tourist thing." But what I did notice, I'm not saying this is like a mind-blowing pairing, but the things I feared kind of were cancelled out, and like they don't, I don't know necessarily. I think the reaction that would normally have happened, and you should try this next time you have like a soft cheese, like a brie or a camembert. Like try it with some red wine that you have. It's probably not going to be a very pleasant experience, but this is kind of like this classic sommelier dilemma, is that when you have cheese boards, red wine is like not is kind of off limits. It's a very hard thing to like pair really well with. You know, we've tasted some cheeses with red wines over the months that we've done wine coaches and cheese corner. But they've been very much suited to it. But I think this is a really cool experiment, and I think, I don't know, cloves and things that are associated with it. So like garam masala and like strong teas. They use a lot of puree. He mentions puree, which is like a smoked tea. These flavors can help bridge the gap between things that foods that would necessarily not be associated with red wines, like fishes and cheeses and chicken and white meats and all these and so incorporating these kind of flavors really helps bridge that gap. And I think this isn't a perfect pairing, but this is a really like it helps me a little bit more confident when someone's like, I only drink red wine, but I really like camembert. What should I drink? I'm like, you can drink whatever you want, but you gotta add some. You gotta wait 3 days and add cloves to your cheese, and then it's gonna taste perfect. But I don't know. I'm not. I wasn't sure when I read this bit. I wasn't sure that this would work.
I was highly suspicious.
As was I. First, I thought the cloves would overpower the cheese. I have, but not so bad. It's funny, Neil talks about in the chat, he was like, it makes the Aglianico really astringent. And I kind of get that. Like, Aglianico needs a lot of acid because there's a lot of tannins, and so it kind of can balance it out. But I also think that like there's this volcanic aspect to Aglianico, especially from Campania, that you often don't necessarily see the way you would see with other volcanic wines like Etna's, and that's all I can think of right now. But I think this is it's a fun way to taste the wines, and it kind of has this Szechuan. The cloves have this kind of Szechuan pepper numbing quality as well, which I think is a really interesting way. And the kind of why I really like this session is that we could just do this every month and compare different flavors and wines and just sort of see how this all interacts, because Szechuan pepper would be a really fun experiment because it does have that numbing quality. And so you could put wines together and it would eliminate certain flavors and certain structural elements of the wine, and you would have a whole different experience.
Absolutely.
In my notebook. That was kind of fun.
I like what Rachel said. It tastes like Christmas, like red wine and cloves. Yes, it is Christmas.
I have a whole little container of clove powder at my desk at work, and I'm really now excited to see what I can do with it, because this is kind of a really fun, eye-opening. I didn't come into this tasting. I mean, I put it together, but it was like very rushed put together like Friday morning. And so this was actually a really fun experiment to like sit down and discuss it with people. Because I guess that's the other part of tasting that, I mean, I think is a big part of like the Alo experience and fine dining experience, is that you often have a team discussing the flavor interactions rather than just like one mind going, oh, this is kind of fun and kind of cool. And I think it has to be that sort of collaboration between, I mean, a kitchen and a sommelier team, and also like people who are just experiencing it and kind of things like that. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, I can say it's most of the time, and I've worked with quite a few other somms. I mean, Christopher and Sheila and Kim. Anyway, lots of people over the past little while, over the past 4 years of being there. And it's funny because we very rarely taste fully together. Usually kind of the process is because half the time there's still guests in the dining room, so we're kind of darting in and darting out and like doing the pairings as we go. And so we usually tend to do it separate and then regroup after and leave a little bit of the dish to go back. And surprisingly enough, almost always we come to the same conclusion, which I've always found a little bit surprising, considering even just with our taste with certain wines or different kinds of winemaking can be so disparate, but a lot of the time we tend to come to the same conclusion. And most of the time when we have adamantly different views, it's a clear indication that we're both wrong and we haven't found the right wine.
That's kind of fun.
Usually, if we go with one pairing that the other person disagreed on, then we put it out in the dining room, and then everybody's just like, "Meh, it's fine." And then we know that we have to go back to the drawing board. So, of course, it's all kind of subjective, and then there's like the chemical part that's objective, but there is something about just things that are delicious and that make your mouth really happy, that it seems like most of the time we can all agree upon.
Yeah, there is a big part of like it's like taste can be such a if you let like your taste kind of take control and you don't think about it much, it can be such a visceral experience to and you like your brain chemistry just like and your pleasure centers just sort of light up if you let it and you have to kind of like relax into it, especially if you're going to a fine dining restaurant and you're geared up to do a food and wine pairing. It's often better not to think too much about it and analyze what's being said and told to you about the flavors and just let your body explain it to you and then kick in. And I think it's kind of like it's kind of where you have to trust the team, like the people in a fine dining restaurant or people doing wine pairings and food and wine pairings. They don't just like throw things together like I kind of do in a wine shop, but like they analyze it and they've done it and they've tasted it and they've tested it. And like there's a lot of thought behind it. So there is always an interaction that is going to happen. You just have to like let it sort of wash over you. And I think, you know, when we get back to fine dining restaurants, the etiquette, there is a way to like enjoy, not the whole thing is enjoyable, but like for someone who like loves wine and loves food as much as I do, there is this pleasure in just like letting someone else do the steering and like taking you on a journey. And I hope if you've all had a fine dining experience, like that's kind of what you should allow to let happen and not think so much about what every ingredient is and what I don't like. Oh, I don't like oysters, so I'm not going to eat this course. It's like just this is your chance to like refresh your palate, and maybe you do like oysters now. I often tell people in wine tastings, I don't know, especially corporate kind of tastings. I'll always pour a Chardonnay or I pour something Rieslings or something controversial, and it's like, look, this wine on paper may not be something you enjoy, but there's always a good chance that just like you might enjoy it, and your wine might be changed. And if I think about the great food experiences that have like blown my brain, it's always been fine dining experiences. And so, that's my hot tip for fine dining. Like experience it and just like have fun with it because it will blow your mind. I hope. I hope that's your goal. I don't know. Wow, we're plowing through these wines. I love this. Okay. Pairing number 4. So this is super classic, very classic. Glutamate, things like MSG, unami, glutamate and unami are like the same chemical. Well, the sensation of unami is tied with glutamate. And I thought we'd end with a wine that is kind of very classic in a wine pairing world is blue cheese and sauternes. So sauternes are like a dessert wine from Bordeaux. They can be extremely expensive, and I can't afford, a lineup of sauternes. But I do have Jurason, and Jurason is like a little south and west, I think. But the flavors are really similar in terms of what they're trying. The flavor profiles are really similar. So I thought blue cheese and Jurason, and then some people got dates, some people got prosciutto, depending on their dietary requirements. But the goal was to pair some really intense unami foods, prosciutto and blue cheese, like unami bombs with like wines that have this glutamate kind of experience. I don't know. I feel like this is probably a pairing that you have to like you've probably worked with before. I mean, you're eating right now, so don't answer the question. But you know, I think this was a very classic kind of sommelier pairing that we've all done in our lifetime. What do you think?
Sorry, if I paused, it was only because my phone had a bit of a delay. But I can say I work with Jurançon all year, every year. I know that a lot of the time people kind of think of it as, you know, something to drink when you can't afford Sauterne, but you know, this is my hot take is that I prefer Jurançon to Sauterne most of the time.
Controversial. I'm changing my lighting already. That's how controversial it was.
You know, I feel like it has a little bit more acidity, more bitterness. Like, but it has usually more of like a citrus kind of rind component that I find to be really nice, and also sometimes even better for food pairing. I mean, and the fact that it's a fraction of the price and that most people who love wine can afford it. So my hot take is that I pick Jurançon over Sauterne most of the time.
And I think it has a more approachable charm to it. It is kind of drinkable on its own. I think a Sauterne is a very dense, intense, very sweet wine. This is kind of the same way that oxidative Jura white wines are like not to be reductive, but like a less intense form of like a sherry. And so it tends to have a bit more broader appeal and a bit more approachability aspect to it. But I can eat blue cheese and prosciutto like every day of my life. It's such a. My original plan was to do dates, prosciutto, and blue cheese, like
archive.
Yeah, like to have this like umami bomb.
Yeah.
Kind of like pigs on horseback, kind of like crazy thing, but those three elements were really great together, but the wine kind of didn't hold up. But once you remove one of those elements, the wine was able to like wedge in there and like play a part in the flavor.
Well, something that kind of makes sense to me is like having like the cheese, prosciutto, and the date kind of all together. And I have the prosciutto and the blue cheese in front of me here, but it almost is like the sweetness and also those kind of like that kind of umami glutamate component in there takes the place of the date for me. So it comes together and fuses together in the same way. Whereas but maybe the date adds something else to the combination that then it doesn't need the wine. And I think that can be just kind of going back to pairing at Aloe. I find that those kind of thoughts that you think about like a combo of flavors and say, what's a third or fourth or fifth ingredient there that would really work if you were composing a dish together, and what wine can kind of sneak in there and take its place. And then it can be this really kind of tricky pairing that it doesn't necessarily make sense on paper. Once you have it, it all really synergizes. And those are my favorite pairings.
Yeah. And I think like I may have said, like these are the most exciting pairings that things on paper you don't often think about, but you should always like I said, the classic is like Sauternes and blue cheese or Roquefort, and like you read it and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. I guess it makes sense, but you really do need to like have that experience and like taste it in your mouth, and you're like, oh, okay, that's why people talk about it so much. Lambrusco and prosciutto, it's like these are really classic pairings that we read about, but we don't often make the time to experience. And now upon reflection, oh, why didn't I do prosciutto and a can of Lambrusco? Maybe next round, it's the one thing I actually like have in abundance is cans of prosciutto and Lambrusco. But you know, there's so much you can work with, like these kind of flavors, and like It's also like a really just fun and pleasurable experience. So yeah, I need more Jurasong. This is delicious. Actually, I have a lot in the restaurant. No one buys it, so I'm going to go crazy with it. But oh, Beverly was saying that the clove and the grey owl and the Jurasong is a cool combination as well. I didn't have any left because I ate it all. But I've got some back at work. I got some spare sets left over, so I'm just going to go crazy and cross match it. And not to put you on the spot, Britt, but I'm curious if like there's any other kind of like pairings that I don't know that or flavor combinations that you often like. I don't know, think about or things that have always like wowed you. I should have given you a warning for this, but I'm just curious as to like I don't know.
I mean, there's honestly, no, I'll figure it out.
This was a bad idea.
No. This is, I guess, give me a moment. Talk about something else. I'll try to come up with one.
So one thing I did want to mention that we didn't really explore in here is like sweet foods and like desserts. And I was curious as to like how you approach dessert pairings. Is it to go with a sweet wine, or is there another angle you can often approach? Because that's something I love. Dessert is my favorite food in the world, and like I just want the dessert. I don't necessarily think about this like what to pair with it. But I'm just curious: is how do you approach like dessert courses at Aloe? Like,
so dessert courses. I mean, we definitely use a lot of Jurançon in desserts. But it really kind of depends on the season. I mean, if any of you have been to Aloe, we tend to be very fruit focused in our desserts, mostly because you've had and less kind of baked goods. But I think that a lot of the time desserts can kind of trip people up, because this is one area where I think that the rule of thumb that your wine always has to be sweeter than the dessert really kind of holds true, because I have tasted like multiple kind of like beautiful wines that weren't actually that sweet be kind of ruined by a sweet dessert that then makes it seem bitter and astringent. But I definitely think that introducing kind of spirit pairings or vermouth pairings or things that are kind of in between, like things like Mac Vin de Jura and
yeah, that's a cool pairing.
Like that is one of my favorite things. That is it really, because sometimes in that way, because where am I thinking about the impression of sweetness to your palate and the impression of alcohol and glycerol in that way, your mouth perceives it as a physical textural sensation as the same thing, which is why even though you might want to pair a spirit, why people kind of think about having, things like bourbon or Grand Marnier. Well, that's actually pretty sweet, but Nonino or vermouth, like things that are sweet but don't have the sweetness content as a sweet wine, can still go so well with dessert, because your palate kind of tricks it into thinking that it's having something super sweet. And that's something that I have found really successful, because sometimes you don't want to talk about the same kind of few sweet wines that are available in the market, even being in Ontario and having so many great local options as well. Sometimes you kind of want to mix it up.
And it's true. And there is a lot of there is a lot of very classic pairings you can do with dessert, and it is worth probably, you need to also reinvent and feel inspired and be creative as well. And that's a really cool way of approaching it. I never really sort of, it's one of those things you just need to like sit down and like taste and eat and taste and eat and like work through it. But, that's, it's a real, like, throughout this whole sort of conversation that we've had, it is worth noting that, what goes well together, like they interact in different ways, and it's not just necessarily pairing things that share the same aromatic compounds. Sometimes it is pairing things that have been like don't share the same aromatic compounds, and sometimes it is about being experimental and like having fun with it and like going on a journey with it. And I think, you know, this has definitely helped me kind of feel a bit more confident with pairings, but also just on my not from a professional level, but just like have fun with it on a personal level. Like when I have dinner, I'm like, instead of thinking, you know, about what would go well with it, why don't I try something that I would never think about and like see how that goes? Because you can have a eureka moment, and I think that happens more often than we like care to admit. That
Hmm.
you can just pair things that you would never intellectualize going well together, and they do, because that's food and wine. Why we love them is they're so complex and there's so many layers and different levels of interaction, and you know you it's often overwhelming, but you just also that's a more of a reason to just be a little bit more casual and a little bit more curious rather than like fearful about it.
Yeah, I definitely, and I think that's one of the great privileges of working in restaurants is having like small bits of access to food and wine and be able to test it out. Like one kind of random thing that is actually so delicious is lamb and Riesling. If you've never tried it, if you're a white wine person who cooks lamb, just dry Riesling and lamb is
I love
amazing.
that. I love Riesling
One
and
of
I love
my
lamb.
other all-time favorite pairings is like Gruner Veltliner and sweetbreads. I don't know how many people are cooking
Oh
sweetbreads at home,
yeah,
but
yes, yes, yes.
these are, or anything with like a big sesame component, even if it's not that heavy of a meal, with like a big juicy like Southern Rhone grapey kind of wine, like peanut butter and jelly kind of combo. So
Guys, I hope you're
it's
writing this down because like this is gold. And
I really think it's worthwhile to be kind of playful with things, because sometimes you find out that's the best way to be. I know that that's actually not very helpful in like a flavor pairing, but I also think it's important to not be so beholden to the rules. And though the chemistry is the chemistry and it's going to do like crazy amazing things in your mouth, that it's more about having fun and enjoying what you're drinking and eating, and being happy when you're eating and drinking is going to honor the wine, the food, and all of the people behind it, more than anything else.
and that's the perfect note to end on, is what honors the food and wine, because it's I think, you know, it can be such a special moment when you allow it to be. And you know, we often, you know, I mean, I often just like, what? And I don't often think about the work that's taken to get that in the glass, or the work that's taken to get the food on the plate, and that's a big part of it. Cool. This has been really fun. I had a lot of fun, and I felt very um, out of my league, but I'm glad everything kind of showed, and I hope everyone had fun. Please shout out in the comments like what your favorite pairing was, and Brittany, I hope thank you for firstly, thank you very much for coming. You, I'm immensely happy that you were able to do this, because this is me rambling on if it wasn't. I hope you had fun, and thank you very
I had
much.
lots of fun.
Yeah, great. And maybe I really want to do this again in a few months and just like play around with some more flavor combinations, because there's like we did 4 chapters, and there's probably like 16 chapters. Like Beverly was asking in the chat, like cool flavors, and maple syrup is a huge part of it, and it's kind of fun, especially because it is a Canadian writer. There are Canadian featured flavors, especially cheese and maple syrup, which is super fun. But thanks so much for coming. I hope you had fun. And I mean, I'll see everyone next week. We've got wine quiz, which is this weird. I haven't really explained it very well because I've been setting it up, but I've got Krista Oben and Kieran Coyne being the team leaders of these like blind tasting quiz that we're going to have part of. There's a team, each have teams of 3, and we're going to play fun games and show you that how serious and nervous blind tasting makes any wine professional, and that by having fun with it, it will help hopefully make it, make you understand, or make non-wine people understand that, like, we're all just like nervous children, and like, we're gonna have to wine taste them. Everyone
It's
was
true.
like they went pale when I suggested it, and I was like, no, this is supposed to be fun. Blind tasting is a really fun experience when you let it, and so, and I think it's a fun experience. It helps with the curiosity of wine and giving people the idea that you don't have to necessarily know what's in the bottle or what's in to know what is, to like have fun with it. And like, you can afford, if you can afford, to have some fun with wine, to be a bit curious and like try something new or try something you haven't had before. And I mean, I'm preaching to the converted in the chat, but it's something everyone should tune in with. And there'll be some wines that we'll all share, and then you can watch them blind taste it while you taste along, and it's gonna be so fun. Thank you, Brittany, for coming. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone in the chat. Have a lovely evening. I will see you all soon. Have a safe lockdown, and I mean, when Aloe reopens, 100% you need to go, and 100% you go. I only want to sit in Brittany's section. Is Brittany working tonight? That's the way you have to approach it. AKA, she's always working and she's always there. She's like a stalwart and she's amazing. So please go visit her. Thank you. Have a good night, Britt. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining the Wine Coach family.